Welcome to episode 6 of Followers of the Cross podcast. This is your host, Jason Reynolds. Today, I'm speaking with Mark Antonacci. He is a lawyer and a world-renowned expert on the Shroud of Turin. The Shroud of Turin is a linen garment that some people believe was the burial shroud of Jesus. Scientific testing has indicated that a crucified body was wrapped in the shroud. Mark has studied the shroud for more than 34 years and has a theory on how he can conclusively prove the shroud's role in history using modern scientific tests. Now to the program.
Hi, Mark.
Hi, how are you, Jason?
Good. Thanks for joining us today. I think probably most people know at least a little bit about what it is, but if you don't mind, just take a moment and tell people a little bit about what the shroud is and what people believe about it, especially why you think that this was the shroud that Jesus had.
The Shroud of Turin is a long linen cloth garment. It's over 14 feet long and over 3.5 feet wide. And when a dead person was buried, they were laid down. The cloth was spread out on the bench or the floor. Where a person would lay down and occupy, maybe the first 6 feet of it or something. And the rest of the cloth was folded over his head back toward his feet. He was kind of like sandwiched in it. They were used extensively in the Middle East in the time of Jesus. They're still used in the Middle East today. Often when you look at the horrible scenes of violence, you will see some of the victims wrapped in shrouds to this day. The second illustration in my book happens to be in chapter 1 of some victims of the Syrian poisonous chemical gas attacks in 2013, and you see them laying side by side in a mass grave, wrapped in shrouds. The shrouds is purported to be the burial garment of Jesus Christ. And when I first came across the subject, I had never, ever heard of such a thing as a Shroud of Turin. This was 34 years ago. And I thought, this just makes no sense to me at all. If it was Jesus' burial garment, how come we haven't heard of it? And how in the world could it have survived that long? But when you start looking at the evidence, it is very sobering, and you realize there's not only an extensive amount of it, but as an attorney, you just don't run into such a large quantity of evidence and the uniqueness of the evidence. There's nothing like it that I've ever seen. And you come to the conclusion, in a much different point of view than where you started out in your investigation, but it appears to have unfakeable evidence that it is Jesus' burial garment.
Okay. And as you mentioned, you're an attorney, and you mentioned the quantity of evidence and the uniqueness of evidence. Do you think that your background gives you a good way of working at this and doing an investigation into this, that you're used to working with evidence?
Yes, I do. Exactly. There's two things really that I think are very important. An attorney can understand the difference between first-hand evidence and second-hand evidence. He's trained to think in terms of whether the evidence is consistent and corroborating, and whether any of it can be faked. In this case, the question would be, could it have been faked by an artist, as was its reputation for centuries? There was two schools of thought. One was that it is Jesus' actual burial garment, and the second, more popular school of thought was that, this was a forgery. It was painted by an artist in medieval times. And the second scenario is simply impossible, that you could not have duplicated all the numerous features on this cloth naturally or by any artistic means. You can't duplicate all the features that are on the shroud in the 21st century. And what you soon realize is that modern technology can simply reveal the details and the features on this cloth, but they can't duplicate them. And the incredible thing is, most of these features were not even visible in medieval times, that it took modern technology such as photography and ultraviolet lighting and photographic enlargers and computer imaging technology to make these features visible. It was very, very astounding, really, very sobering.
Okay. And if one were to say this probably then is a shroud from long ago, maybe even from the time of Jesus, how do you convince someone to go from that point A to point B, that this was the exact shroud that was used with Jesus?
Well, while the Shroud of Turin has two full-length images of the front and back sides of a victim who not only incurred all the wounds that Jesus did during his passion prior to the crucifixion, but has all the wounds of a crucifixion victim, including post-mortem wounds from after his death, obviously, and his body's in rigor mortis, and the rigor mortis sets in the vertical crucifixion position, and it appears to have been executed with Roman instruments and buried according to detailed Jewish burial customs. And these are all things that there was other crucifixion victims in ancient times, and this even appears to have occurred in the first century and in Jerusalem, but of course there were other victims in those times. But what you have, and what you could prove with the additional testing that we're recommending that the cloth be tested at the atomic and molecular levels. But what you could have if you did, you could have indisputable proof that a miraculous event occurred after this man was, in essence, tortured and crucified and killed and buried in a tomb of the Second Temple period in Jerusalem. But the miraculous event would distinguish him most of all from any other victim. But there's many, many other points of distinction between Jesus and any other crucifixion victim. One of the more obvious ones is, billions of people have died over the years and been buried in either shrouds or had sheets or blankets or bandages or jackets or clothing or soldiers' uniforms or things like that over their body. And there's nothing remotely similar to the unique body images and blood marks that are found on the Shroud of Turin. You don't see these on any other piece of cloth. And the shroud not only has full-length body images, but at least 130 blood marks distributed along the frontal and dorsal images of this dead victim that have never been duplicated.
So tell me a little bit more about the testing that you are recommending. What what would the process be like? And is this something that you think can happen, or is it, is the red tape involved?
Believe it or not, the scientific results indicate that the most likely explanation is that radiation, the most likely explanation of the images, and the blood marks still red color, by the way, after all these centuries, is there's a hypothesis that you mentioned at the beginning of the program that if radiation was emitted from this body as it disappeared, you could encode all of the unique features found throughout the length and width of the body images. And the most likely form of radiation even appears to be particle radiation. It's very astounding, very, very, very unique, just unlike anything you've ever come across before. Well, the thing about particle radiation is, it's well known, too, in the scientific community. Particle radiation would create carbon-14 atoms all over the cloth. If such an event occurred, it would make an ancient cloth appear to be younger. And, believe it or not, that's what we think happened to the Shroud of Turin. Of the thousands of tests that have been done on the Shroud of Turin, only one result is inconsistent with its authenticity as Jesus' burial garment, and that was its carbon-14 or radiocarbon dating that was performed in 1988 that said it came from the Middle Ages. Well, you could actually prove with billions of items of radioactive evidence that the cloth and its blood marks were irradiated with particle or neutron radiation, that every part of the cloth was irradiated, and that the source of this irradiation was the dead crucified corpse wrapped in this cloth. And you can not only prove such an event occurred, but the numbers of these unfakeable radioactive atoms distributed in various proportions all over the cloth would actually tell you when this event occurred and could even tell you where this event occurred. And if it did occur, it would irrefutably dismiss or dispel, refute the radiocarbon dating of 1988. I'm not trying to get too technical, but it would create three radioactive atoms who are formed at different rates and disappear at different rates and are distributed in various proportions throughout the cloth. But from all of that information, these things are so unique and appear at such known rates and disappear at such known rates. You could prove that not only that the event occurred, but how many carbon-14 atoms was added to the cloth that would make its date would throw the date off by about 1,000 years or more.
Wow. Okay. So how likely do you think that it is that you can get this test done, or do you know at this point?
Right now, at this moment, it is discouraging. Most people in Italy, many Italian scientists, and many of the ones that serve as many of the authorities in Turin that serve as intermediaries to Rome know next to nothing about this. They know next to nothing about particle radiation, and they're scared to have it tested again because they feel like they leaned into a left hook